Firstly, I would like to acknowledge the PyroLife project has received funding from the European Union's Horizon 2020 Research and Innovation Program. It's a MSCA ITN, an innovative training network under the grant agreement number 860787. Thank you for joining us today for PyroLife's Living with Fire webinar, where we share different perspectives on wildfire from within Europe and the rest of the globe. In the previous webinar, we had perspectives from the land down under Australia, and today's webinar, we will have a perspective from the Mediterranean, with the topic wildfire and flood risk in the Mediterranean, gaps, challenges, and opportunities towards integrated risk management. Today's webinar will be hosted by myself, Ichu Lambrechts, and Simona Dossi, who will be writing an article for the PyroLife blog. So I will take a minute to promote my research. I'm the ESR for topic 10 and responsible for the topic how to make wildfire prevention more enticing. I'll be looking at lessons in risk reduction from flood and water management in the Netherlands for integrated fire management, and also study different approaches to achieve this, which include climate information services and payment for ecosystem service incentives or disincentives, and a SWOT analysis for fuel management in Northwestern Europe. If you're interested in any of the topics, feel free to visit the PyroLife website and to make contact with me. So before I introduce our three speakers, I would like to cover a few general housekeeping arrangements. Today's webinar is being recorded, and we will be able to share this link with you after the event is complete. We welcome you to revisit the content yourself and share it with your colleagues. We also invite you to post questions in the Q&A box on the screen. If you think of any question for the speakers at any point, you can just type it in there, and we'll either pose it to our speakers during the discussion portion at the end of the presentations, or we'll try to answer it afterwards if it does not make it to that section. Today's webinar will have a slightly different format to usual. The three speakers will present their topics consecutively, and we will have a combined discussion at the end. Today's presenters in the order of presenting are Eduard Plana. He is the head of the Forest Policy and Risk Governance Department in the Science and Technology Center of Catalonia. He is a forest engineer and has an MSc in wildfire management. His main research and development activities deals with inclusive wildfire risk management, environmental governance and communication, and strategic forest land planning, looking into evolving societal and forestry crosslinks. Then we have Bàrbara Ortuño. She is the mayor of Bruc, Barcelona in Spain, a town with 2,200 inhabitants within the natural park of the mountain of Montserrat, and one of the municipalities where a Life Montserrat 2014 to 2019 was implemented. And finally, we have Marta Giambelli. She is an expert in civil protection planning and procedures for flood risk at CIMA Research Foundation. CIMA Risk Foundation's Planning and Procedures Unit. She has an environmental engineering MSc and expertise in civil protection planning and procedures and early warning systems for flood risk. She also has expertise in disaster flood risk reduction through the implementation of non-structural measures, especially related to preparedness and experiencing participatory planning processes. So at this time, I'm going to hand over to Eduard Plana, who is going to start today's presentation. Eduard, you can share your screen when I stop sharing.
Okay, thank you very much. I think that you are listening me and you can see the full screen. It's okay?
You can go ahead, Eduard.
Yes. Okay, so first of all, thank you to the PyroLife project to give us the opportunity to share our experience in dealing with wildfire risk. Of course, wildfire phenomena, it's a complex phenomena. Try to summarize in short minutes, it's also a challenge. And overall, if we try to give some insights in relation to the integrated wildfire risk management and challenges and opportunities. But this is an amazing challenge. So basically, my objective with this presentation is to offer some or to share some reflections more in the conceptual sphere and motivate again also the discussion with all of you. We are at the Forest Science and Technology Center of Catalonia. We are a research institution, but also works very close to the stakeholders. So we do applied research and transference. And I'm dealing with wildfire issues from a long time ago. And basically, maybe I can point that in the last years also, I had the opportunity to coordinate several projects under the umbrella of Sea Protection Mechanism of European Commission, which also give me the opportunity or give us the opportunity to move the discussion about wildfires to a very operational level. Going inside the concepts, I think that there is a quite important point dealing with wildfires. I mean, of course, we are inside the global umbrella of natural hazards, but it could seem so very obvious, but most probably wildfires in between the main natural hazards are maybe one of the most socio-natural hazards, where this combination of natural and anthropogenic factors are more cross-linked and of course influenced by climate change. This is common in every natural hazard. Obviously, in terms of vulnerability exposure, which is main topics dealing with wildfire risk management, there are some common issues related to other risks like floods, of course. And here there is a picture highlighting some of main worries that are in the risk management agency currently in terms of impact of fire in houses, according to the wildlife urban interfaces. Also the impact of fires in roads and infrastructures. And there is another, there's a big problem on that in terms of even safety or lives or fatalities, as you remember the event in Portugal in 2017 with so many people died in the road treatment. But also there is this other component of all this recreational use in forest land, and especially in the Mediterranean and in touristic areas. It's obvious that there is a huge amount of people spreading and visiting forest areas, so they can become exposed population when that forest areas become dangerous. And this is also a particularity because not always that forest areas are dangerous. So if it's in rainy season in spring, people don't have any perception that this is a dangerous place. But in plenty summer, normally when it's the peak of the season, the touristic season, most of these areas become dangerous. So there is also there a chapter challenge in terms of communicating risk. But globally, from this point of view, there is a cross link between the wildfires events, how is planned the land or the spatial planning, and how is prepared this landscape and that communities to the impact of the fire. But dealing with fire, we have especially this hazard, this natural hazard is giving us or has a really important particularity in terms that we can influence or we can change a lot the level of hazard according how the forests are managed, according the distribution of fuels in the landscape. As I said, this is obvious for most of us because we are, if we are familiar in topic of fire, we know perfectly that as more dense are the forests, more intense can be the fire. But try to make the example thinking in rainfalls or snow falls. It's difficult to influence the intensity of the rainfall or the intensity of the snowfall. So it's difficult to influence the starting point of the risk chain, let's say. But fire, we can influence perfectly the level of hazard. Of course, climate change is having a huge influence on that, because it's, in fact, currently in Mediterranean areas, but I think in most of areas in the world where fire risk is extending, there are two processes in parallel that, as risk drivers, are influencing the level of hazard, of course. And one is land use changes, and in terms of more and more fueled landscapes. And the other one is the climate change, which makes, in some cases, these forests much more vulnerable to the flames and the spread of the fire. So both processes has a lot of even uncertainties, and both are running in parallel. So the challenge in this case is really huge, which means that I like to summarize in this triangle main factors influencing wildfire risk. And basically, as I said, in terms of landscape, we can heavily influence in the fire spread capacity. In fact, the approach where we are trying to work, even with these projects in the sea protection, we try to work this idea of having these managed landscapes, can be with traditional activities, prescribed burn, etc., doing this passive prevention and reducing this level of hazard of the forest. We are at the same time improving the preparedness and response capacity of the landscape, doing them much more efficient and much more safety. Even if we have less hazardous landscape, we have to invest less in active prevention. So there is a clear connection between what we do in the landscape and what level of risk we have. But there is also a strong link between what is not done in the landscape and what kind of risk management we are able to achieve or to carry out. Of course, today time is short. We cannot go into detail in all topics, but it's very difficult to talk about how to achieve more resilient landscapes without talking about fire ecology. And we know, because science knows and is well analyzed, that fire is in many ecosystems a natural component of these ecosystems, and that we have low intensity, high recurrence fire adapted ecosystems, which means these open forest lands with low understory, etc. But also we have natural ecosystems that are, and forests that are adapted to high intensity and low recurrence, which, let's say, replace, I would like to say destroy, but it's not a destruction, but in some way replace the forest cover totally. In these cases, so we could wonder if we could give fire ecology a change or a role into risk reduction strategies. And what we find is that not always overall at social level, there is a clear distinction between fire and wildfires, but people makes a clear distinction between snow and avalanches, or even between water and floods. So we have good fires that can prevent bad fires, but this is not always well known, not only for society, even at technical level or inside the aim or the academia. Of course, prescribed burn is helping us to explain this positive role that fires can play to prevent wildfires. But when talking about resilient landscapes, we should also wonder if we are able to restore these forest structures adapted to the fires. And this comes from my experience on the field. Sometimes what we find is that these forest structures, let's say, ideally adapted to the fire ecology, are not exactly the same that the forest owners like in terms of wood provision, for instance. So there is also a challenge how to optimize objective, different ecosystem service objectives. In any case, I will move after this introduction to the presentation, just basically with sharing some reflections about these three questions. I select these ones, could be much more, but I think that it's good for the webinar objective. So the first one about what means living with fire and how to plan it. Well, you know that things has changed a lot in terms of how we understand wildfire phenomena. This is a nice modification of the message in terms of that only you can prevent wildfires, and finally they are much more explaining that only you can live with wildfires. But I would like here to make a point about what exactly means this for society. I remember perfectly a nice project some years ago, multi-risk project, and the explanation coming from from an experience in England, talking about the perception of people living with floods. And they find that people was agreed to live with water, but was not fully sure, convinced to live with floods. So I think that it's not very, sometimes they're just concepts, but it's important. So there is some kind of responsibility in the spatial planning, gaps on spatial planning, when we are asking people to live with floods. But in any case, the situation within fire is much more complex, because even they are sending this kind of message that how fire suppression policies, because of fire paradox, has influenced to the current level of hazard. On the opposite side, with floods, I think that the proper land planning has achieved important success in terms of reducing exposure and vulnerability. And of course, there are a lot of work to do still. Well, but this is some similarities, at the same time differences in between hazards. Well, we have the European Commission, globally is quite convinced about the need of promoting this landscape more resilience in front of fire. But we should wonder about what exactly means to achieve this resilience landscape. Of course, it doesn't seem realistic try to move of this kind of landscapes we had in Mediterranean areas about 70 or 100 years ago, not much. This is the only landscape, the only solution by the moment we have seems to eliminate the possibility of having high intensity fires. Of course, this is an extreme. And even looking at these landscapes, probably we will find a lot of conflicts in terms of biodiversity conservation, etc. So there is still some elements there to be discussed. Also, what means resilience in terms of a strategy, risk strategy. So maybe if we see this picture of the house, we see there a fail. So something is not working properly. But if we assume that this is a very rare event, that normally these avalanches don't happen or happen very infrequently, and you have also at the same time here a system of early warning, so you can give information to that people that days with so high level of risk they should leave, maybe it's not so much problem to have an activity there. So there is not a unique solution inside the risk cycle, and sometimes you can be very defensive with like these structures up to what level of hazard. So let's say the size of the stone. But if you expect stones bigger, of course, this defense is not going to work, and you have another alternative in terms of evacuation or in terms of confinement in safety places. So probably this is a mix of solutions from the spheres of prevention, preparedness, of course, and response. So having this landscapic landscaping with fire in mind as a challenge, there is also some particularities in terms of fire, because when we, for instance, talking with floods, we have more or less a clear map and more or less a clear recurrence where the flood is going to move on. But fire is much more random in terms of distribution, which makes difficult also to convince, for instance, urban planners about conditions for doing this urban planning more resilient. And also, there is not a clear definition about the risk scenarios. So we should prepare our landscapes for the so-called sixth generation fires, or we are able to assume that we can live with 3, 4 generation fires, and when a sixth generation, that is very rare, but happen, fire appear, we will have another kind of a strategy in terms of evacuation or confinement. So there are still questions open there, but a unique solution is not feasible for sure. And again, in terms of urban planning, there are some important gaps in terms of identifying properly the hazard, but also the exposure and vulnerability of the elements, even in terms of juridics. So moving to the next question about dealing with risk mitigation, who pays for what to whom, what I try with...
Eduard?
Yes, please. Sorry?
Just 5 minutes left.
Yes, thank you, Hugo. What I try with this question and these two pictures is basically to make the link between the hazard, the exposed elements, and to what extent they are vulnerable or not to the hazard. Normally, what we see in our wildlife urban interface, for instance, in the Mediterranean, we have typically reactive legal frames. We are asking people by law to make the typical fire break following the age of the urbanizations. But we know perfectly that areas are exposed also to the impact of large fires, which will, let's say, jam in a very easy way now, these fire breaks. So if we want to, let's say, reduce the potential of impact of wildfires in these urban areas, probably we should go beyond, so make the picture bigger and start thinking in connecting the level of hazard that this, for instance, forest area can provide to this urban area. And maybe we could try to connect the demands here. For instance, this is the terrible accident in Mati in Greece in 2018. So we can imagine that this is also a touristic area. So if we do management here, we are protecting this touristic area, and we are protecting the economy of this area. And normally in our legal frames, etc., this is not fully connect. This is not totally connect how, in a proactive way, how to be able to connect those who are providing fire prevention to those who are the beneficiaries of this environmental service of regulation. Of course, we have another challenge in the Mediterranean. We are living with wildfire for a long time, but there is an extension of the fire risk in Central North Europe, etc. And we can, through connecting our lessons learned, we also can accelerate this learning process. In any case, moving to the last question about what to communicate and how involve the fire community. I love this excellent works from USA, also the nice experience in England or North Europe, Netherlands, with the flood groups that now they are implementing with the wildfire groups, that they are putting together different actors. So there is an important question here about what we understand for fire community. From my point of view, I normally like to say that fire community should be all the actors in both sense, those who are providing prevention or reduction of risk, and those who are or need to receive this reduction of risk. Here you have some examples. I mean, homeowners, etc. Forest owners, probably, if we are in a touristic area, we should also include the touristic sector, etc. But there is a tricky issue there, because this is a typical advertisement trying to get awareness between neighbors. And I mean, sometimes I stop with this question. This is in Catalan, but it's asking, if the fire arrives, are you prepared? Well, I'll let here because I think that is something nice to discuss but is this the proper question to address to the society directly? Should we ask people to be prepared, or should we be sure through spatial planning not to put people in danger in such a way? So there is a really, even this is something that is very juridic, but there are some discussions on that about the ownership of the risk. So up to what extent do people make responsible of living close to the forest? Because at the same time they can say, well, the responsibility of the fire risk in that forest area is coming from the forest owner, could say, or forest manager. I don't want to make a position. I'm just saying that these things are there and sometimes make difficult this integrative approach and putting all together. This is the last, I think, just concept slide. But it's I also love this article because for me summarize in a very good way 4 elements that, or factors that when we move at individual level. So they find these 4 questions at individual level, how to motivate them. And you can see there about the perceived efficiency, the confidence in how I will be able to carry out these measures. As I said before, up to what level I'm responsible or not, and the confidence and trust towards institutions and promoting actions. And in that point, and it's very nice having Bàrbara here, because I think that in terms of local governance and local municipalities can play and are playing an incredible role in terms of bottom-up experience. My last point here is also that in terms of communication, I'm trying to show here 2 examples. On one side was a very nice collaboration that we worked deeply some years with our main environmental groups here in Spain, WWF and Greenpeace Spain, that help a lot us in disseminating, even, for instance, in this case, the good fire. But at the same time, for instance, currently now there is this campaign open, also there is WWF, about, well, the worries they have about this, promoting biomass for fire prevention or biomass for climate adaptation, etc., and how this can suppose a conflict with, just to have in mind that not always what we understand that is well understood, it happens, and more explanations are needed for sure. So here is a summary about the basically main topics I discussed during the presentation, so I don't want to take more time for my presentation. Basically, maybe I could make just very fast. When we talk about social understanding, it's not only about society, it's also about, for instance, academia, which are playing an important role about what professionals from several universities, etc., are understanding and are explaining and can integrate. Maybe also we have to improve the capacity of the organizations to deal with complex and cross-sectoral issues that globally are quite segmented, especially in the Mediterranean area. We are not very used to do it in a collaborative way things. And maybe the last point is what we see in our research, in perception, or even in motivations of forest owners and generally to carry out more fire prevention, what we see is that normally additional funds are needed. And there we should explore new opportunities. The Rural Development Program is the typical way, but we also, is my last comment, I think that there are some challenges in terms of trying to involve more the private sector. So the private sector has to understand that they need to do some effort to be sure that they can keep with their economic activities on the land. And a typical example is the touristic sector, which will suffer a lot this increase of wildfire risk in the Mediterranean areas. That's all. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Eduard. Very nice presentation. We'll now move on to Bàrbara Ortuño. Bàrbara, can you share your presentation, please?
Can you see it?
Yes, you can maybe make it full screen, please.
I will try. Okay. Oh, no, sorry. Okay. Can you see it now?
Yes, thank you very much, Bàrbara.
Thanks to you. Well, thank you. Good afternoon to you all. And thank you very much for inviting me to this technical workshop for PyroLife. Do I say it right? PyroLife. Well, I will talk about our experience with Life Montserrat project. It's an European life project for biodiversity and the challenges we face now once finished. I think the main lesson we have learned from the Life Montserrat project is that what enhances biodiversity by building a rich and diverse landscape with open spaces and pastures also helps to reduce and mitigate wildfire risk in our area. Okay. Well, I guess it is well known that in the Mediterranean region, we have a lack of proper forest management. I think it's quite common. The land use changes during the last decades, mostly associated with the abandonment of agricultural practices, but also with the plummeting of the local activities related to forest management, like timber production, have increased the forest continuity and have reduced landscape diversity. Nowadays, we have a forest structure with high tree density, as you can see in the picture, and that limits the tree growth and less forest biodiversity. Altogether, make our forests prone to extreme fires, especially in an accelerated climate change context. And that makes Mediterranean forests the need to proper active management for fire prevention, for biodiversity conservation, and for climate change adaptation. And also, considering the main causes that lead to land abandonment, we also need proper forest management to promote economic activities related to high quality nature and landscape management. Life Montserrat project was designed and implemented in response to these needs for nearly 6 years. It was extended. I think it was at the beginning, it was planned for 4 years, but it was extended 1 or 2 more. The project had a cost of 2.6 million euros, and 70% of the total budget was spent on forest and farm works. During these years, effective management solutions were implemented to meet 2 main goals: improving fire prevention, and the main goal was improving landscape and biodiversity conservation. As you can see on the map, you see the map, the main concept behind the project was the creation of a green infrastructure through forest restoration, recovery of open areas, and implementation of small farms for grazing activities. As you can see, all the forest works and farming activities were not evenly distributed in the area. There were key strategic areas defined with the aim of preventing extreme forest fires. These strategic areas were identified by firemen with a strong expertise in fire behavior. And as you may guess, the idea was to optimize the resources spent trying to protect all the area with less than 10% of effective land management. I think the math is quite clear on this. The main expected results we think that they have been achieved. I am not saying this, it's like experts who are saying this. At the end of the project, we do have land in better conditions. Regarding wildfire prevention, nowadays we have low fuel loads in the strategic areas, less biomass accumulation, and less continuity. Regarding biodiversity conservation, all the data and indicators are shown at the time an increase of biodiversity. And forest and landscape in general are proved more resilient. Well, it's difficult for me to say in which terms I prove more resilient. I think that Eduard should maybe clarify this. And there is also new livestock activity, mainly herds of goats, cows, and donkeys. Not only there is new farming infrastructure, there are also grazing agreements between farmers and landowners. And I think that one of the main outcomes of the project is the engagement of key stakeholders and support and understanding of local population, completely necessary to succeed on the long term, as Eduard also was saying on his presentation. I think there has been an improvement of social understanding of fire and wildfire and risk management. And the next one. Well, now it's time to talk about my town. Regarding our town, Elbrook is one of the 14 municipalities of the European Life Montserrat project, and it is situated on the southwest side of Montserrat Mountain. As you can see on the aerial picture, is a really small town with a population of, as you said before, 2,200. I think you said more, but it's 2,200 inhabitants, but with a large piece of land to manage, with more than 80 kilometers of forest trails and some isolated houses on the north area that you cannot see the north area from here. More than 80% of our municipality is covered by a continuum of pine tree forest and bushes, and in a hilly and rough landscape with only 9% of field crops. It is also important to bear in mind that most part of the land has private ownership. We are a rural town, very well communicated by road with Barcelona. You can see the main road, which links Barcelona-Madrid. And this makes us, also because we have a very nice landscape, this makes us an attractive spot to live, and explains why we have nearly doubled our population in the last decade, with people coming from Barcelona metropolitan region. And this is very important for us also because it makes of us a dormitory town, we call it this way. The next slide is, okay. No need to say that Copfield's abandonment and the lack of proper forest management did and do increase the wildfire risk in this area, as you can see. As many other neighborhoods towns, vineyards were the main field crop by the end of the 19th century. And nowadays, there are only 2 small vineyard fields, only 2 left, some scattered cereal fields and olive tree fields at the south feet of the mountain. The vineyards fields you can see here, nowadays it's full, it's a forest. That makes of Elbrook a municipality with much land to manage and only a handful of people working on it. And also I have to say that our municipality has suffered 2 big wildfires in the last 40 years. And as you can see on the map, the last one was in 2015, and it burned 1,200 hectares of mainly forest and fields. In this occasion, the fire was controlled and extinguished by firemen by the road on the right-hand side. I hope you can see the road, the white road. And thanks to all the forestry works made under Life Montserrat project in the previous year. It was extinguished by control and extinguished there, thanks to this. With other weather conditions, we were said that the same wildfire could have headed south threatening the houses of the nearest residential area, the black spot there, and the natural park itself on the right hand side. I strongly believe that one of the most important pieces of heritage from the LIFE project itself has been the creation of and reinforcement of a strong and empowered social ecosystem, which nowadays shares a new common storytelling of this land and also the forest management and the land management that now also includes the citizenship. Thanks to our previous work, we now have many actors working on the field. We have public and private organizations working together to enhance biodiversity, which includes forestry work. We also have private associations working on the field. For example, I think it's very important, this one, there's a forest owner association with more than 80 members implementing forestry works on strategic areas defined by firemen on a yearly basis, and it's all funded by public funds. So every year we have forestry work as a continuum of the Montserrat LIFE project. There is also a new association of 16 municipalities that works for the rural development in the Montserrat region. And also, as a result of LIFE Montserrat, we all have much scientific data. I think Eduard, it helped a lot with this also. And firemen feel expertise on what works and what doesn't work for wildfire prevention in the area. Even though I'm not trying to list a comprehensive list here, you are listing the main goals to achieve from our point of view, as some of the actions are taken, some of the action undertaken up to date. If we think that if we want to keep people working the land, we need farmers and shepherds to make a living from the land. This is the main goal, we think. And the main challenge here is how to make viable small livestock farms and a small scale, most of them non-professional agriculture activities, or nearly non-professionals. The small scale livestock farms are run mainly by young and new shepherds with the small herds grazing in low productivity soils. It seems challenging, right? And in this sense, we are working on 4 main ideas with them. 3 main ideas, sorry, and one is further on. From one side, we try to easy the income diversification by paying for environmental services like buffer zones grazing. I've just recently learned that it's fire break areas. We are working in coordination among neighboring municipalities, the ones who also participated in the LIFE Montserrat project, but also new ones. And also we are helping with production cost reduction by paying for key common infrastructure like a new cutting room, which will be finished this year. Also improving forest trails. We do a lot of maintenance of forest trails, and also helping with watering facilities and other facilities, livestock facilities for the livestock.
Sorry, Barbara. Can you start wrapping up, please?
Sorry?
Can you start finishing your presentation?
Yeah,
please?
yeah. I only have 2 left, I think.
Okay, thank you.
Regarding traditional crop fields, we are working to preserve actual small scale olive tree fields and avoid further abandonment. In short, the main goal here is to increase the income of local producers so they can cover the expenses. In this sense, we are working to increase the value of local olive oil, which is already a premium oil, but is still sold at a low price. We are putting here a little bit of marketing strategy. And we also promoting agrotourism based on local olive oil culture. We are also promoting bio-local culture, and we are working. The main challenge here is to gain social recognition for rural activities. You can see that all the things we do here. And so since I think I don't have much time, I just skip this one. I think we will share, I guess, this presentation. And also, I think that it's very important, and well, it's good that Eduard himself was stressing on this, that we think that in the context of newcomers from urban areas and the lack of rural background they have, we believe it's very important to spread knowledge of the territory as a whole and raise awareness on wildfire risk prevention. And we conducted free guided routes. We do conferences on this, and we write articles on any support that we have from our municipality. And well, thank you very much. This is one of the vineyards from the Life Montserrat project. You see that also we took care of the landscape. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Barbara, for your very nice presentation. It's a pity that we needed to cut it short a little bit.
Oh, it's okay.
Marta, can you please share your screen and go ahead with your presentation?
Yes, of course. Just 1 second.
Okay, we can see it properly now.
Okay, so good afternoon, everybody. And first of all, thanks to the PyroLife project for this really kind invitation. And I'm so glad to be here in this webinar. And so I'm Marta Giambelli, and as Hugo said, I work for CIMA Research Foundation, which is a non-profit research foundation active in the fields of disaster risk reduction and civil protection. And it is one of the scientific competence center of the Italian Department of Civil Protection. So my presentation will go much through a flood risk, and I will show you our participatory approach for floods risk preparedness at local level, so from the perspective of the local level. And of course, I will show it in its steps towards an integrated and community-based disaster risk management. So as Eduard has already introduced, flood risk is highly influenced by development processes, and it has also exacerbated and by unplanned and unsustainable development, such as unplanned urbanization or unplanned land use change. And it can be also amplified by climate change. In fact, regarding flood risk in Europe, future climate change is projected to increase in the occurrence and frequency of once-in-a-century river floods in most regions of Europe. And moreover, also pluvial and flash floods are likely to become more frequent throughout Europe. And moreover, as you can see from the schema reporting in the slide, there are also more interconnections between all these factors. So disaster itself can threaten development, and as well as development can influence climate change. So all these factors, for sure, as has been said also by the other speaker, are challenging current risk management policies and practices, and claim for a shift from a more fragmented and sectoral approach to a more complex and integrated approach, which must contribute to align disaster risk reduction, climate change, and sustainable development goals agenda. And so in this context, disaster risk reduction should systematically reduce existing risk and also avoiding the creation of new risk by reducing vulnerability, and also by strengthening the capacity of people, communities, and systems. And moreover, we should also move towards living with risk and living with uncertainty. And in this context, the engagement and involvement of local communities can, in the process of disaster risk management, can be very effective to create a community able to cope with the current risks, but also with future risks. So In this context, I would like to share with you our experience in floods preparedness planning or civil protection planning. I will use these two terms as synonymous in this context. And in particular, we applied this methodology at local level, so dealing with the municipalities and in the Italian context. And most of all, I would like also to show you all our efforts and also attempts to address the described issue before, so the integration between climate change and disaster risk reduction and sustainable development. So since 2011, CIMA has worked on an experimental methodology, and this methodology is based on community participation for drafting effective and efficient civil protection plan. And this participatory approach to civil protection planning is very innovative in the Italian context and has been recently also acknowledged by the new Italian Civil Protection Code. And another aspect that I would like to stress is that when I talk about participation in this context, in our approach, we mean the construction of a decision process that ensure involvement and also co-design between the public institutions and relevant stakeholders on some contents of the plan that we will see later. So the civil protection plan at local level is our starting point, and this is due to many reasons. And this plan can be seen as at the interface between an eventual disaster and all the other phases of the disaster risk management. And this plan is the place where municipality has the occasion to understand and manage the territory in its relationship with the residual risk. So the risk residual from all the other disaster risk management phases. And moreover, it is acknowledge and recognize that the local level is the level where governments and communities can best engage with each other and also work together. So our questions related to our approach, of course, evolved in the years, and in this new context framework, we have started questioning if this planning approach to the civil protection plan could address the issue described and so can contribute to disaster risk reduction, climate change, fostering also prevention. So I will try to give you some answers to this question, sharing with you a case study and highlighting the lesson learned from them. The case study I'm presenting you is related to the intermunicipal territory of Wildfire in the province of Genova in the northern of Italy, and it was implemented by CIMA in the framework of the European project Proterina Revolution. The territorial context is characterized by five small municipalities, and it is characterized also by many physical but also social interconnections, also in terms of services such as school that are shared between municipalities. And moreover, we can say that the territories as an homogeneous level of risk, they are all characterized by small basins which respond very quickly to an intense precipitation, creating flash floods mostly. And most of the flood-prone areas intersected the main infrastructures, and also half of the schools were in flood-prone areas. And moreover, in this territory, there was an ongoing process of intermunicipal planning process. So we took the chance to work in this territory also with our work on the intermunicipal civil protection plan. So going through the process, I would just focus a bit on the main actors of this required by this planning process. And first of all, what we found is that there is a need of a group of actors with a wide and different expertise that can coordinate and support the planning process. And in this case, this expertise has been covered by CIMA. And also a process like this needs another actor able to facilitate the participatory approach with the stakeholders, and this was covered by a group of sociologists. Moreover, the other question is, it is central to understand who to involve priorly in the planning process. And the administration, of course, has a central role in this process, also in terms of responsibilities. And what we have then found is that the mayor and the political part, the political subjects have a central role in promoting and also urging this kind of process inside the administration and within the technicians involved. And on the other hand, an added value of this process came from the involvement of offices beyond the one that deals directly with civil protection, such as the offices which deal with territorial planning and also school offices, of course, if these offices are present in the municipality, and as well as external technicians that usually support municipality. And in particular, in this sense, with our methodology, we promote the creation of a working group responsible for the planning drafting, so fostering also connectivity and coordination processes inside the administration. Then, of course, we should identify the relevant stakeholders to actively involved in the participatory process. And what we found is that even if we organized open meetings, it is, of course, really crucial to intercept relevant and key stakeholders. And in this case, we identified the schools as a central stakeholder. They are, in fact, a strategic building, but they are also the educational cornerstone, and they represent a really wide and diverse community, so networking different subjects to the process. So all these actors and stakeholders were involved in the planning process, which in its first phase is interested mostly the municipalities. And after a first phase of activation aimed at bringing into focus a common objective and all the steps and tasks of each of the actors involved of the process, we organized a training focused on flood risk, early warning system, civil protection planning issues, and also participatory processes. And this training is, of course, aimed at increasing knowledge and capacities of the technicians, but it is also aimed at developing a common language within the group and also create the working group that will then draft the plan. And the third step is then the phase of co-design with the relevant stakeholder. And we usually implemented 3 participative workshops. And in particular, the second one is dedicated to a participatory risk mapping to identify the hotspots, the critical hotspots for flood. So involving the local knowledge of stakeholders. While the last one is a focus group to elaborate and co-plan a shared recommendation and actions and early actions that can be implemented by each stakeholder in the preparedness and response phases, but also in the prevention phase. So what emerged from this workshop is that the territory was characterized by a high dishomogeneity in the municipality's choices and actions regarding schools, and this was creating a high confusion in the population. So at this point, participants started identifying critical issues regarding school actions and went through their review to make them more efficient, taking into account and evaluating a context-related vulnerability and capacity of the schools community and also of the municipality. And so, and creating a ground of shared responsibilities and a common risk vision of the territory. So this review has then continued and materialized during the last phase, the collaboration phase, which involved mostly municipalities and schools managers, and which has led to two important results. And the first result was the definition of a better flood risk scenario, as I was said. And this new risk scenario was able to enrich the regional flood maps with also vulnerability and capacity mapping at local level. And this detailed risk map results useful not only in the preparedness phase, but it became also a tool to support reducing vulnerability to hazards and also enhancing the local capacity. And moreover, it became also an important tool able to inform the intermunicipal plan with relevant information, at least the one gathered for schools. And the second result was the definition of shared and accepted actions by the municipalities related to school, related to the risk scenario, so taking into account the shared vision of the risk in the territory. And these shared procedures will be then integrated with the school's emergency plan in order to have an effective early action to the territory. So starting from these results and trying to move to a wider vision of the process, and also coming back to our questions, trying to answer them, we can say that this process fostered local vulnerability and capacity assessment, and it was an occasion also to inform the intermunicipal urban plan. And most of all, this participatory process applied to a civil protection plan fostered institutional capacity and also technicians' empowerment, and it fostered also the community capacity. So in this way, we make the institution more capable to deal with an emergency plan, but also with unforecasted events. So we tried also to deal with uncertainty. So to conclude, our participatory planning process for civil protection contributed to have, of course, a more efficient civil protection plan, but contributed also to address climate change adaptation and sustainable development. And it contributed also to develop a social ground. Before, Barbara said that the social ecosystem, and able to produce an improvement in the future risk governance, and of course also in the current risk governance. And it increased risk awareness of the community, and also make stakeholders more aware of their role for a more effective management of the territory. And it was also a process that supported the interaction between the civil protection plan and other plans, and contributed to enhance the collective agency of the territory to cope with disaster risk. So with this, I've concluded. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Marta. We now move to some questions. The first question is for Eduard from Kathleen. She says, thanks, Eduard. Under climate change, we might expect both more intense water and fire-related risks in the same area. Do you think it's possible to have socio-ecological landscapes prepare for both of these interrelated risks at once?
I think that this is a very good question, because it's also just showing a more worrying situation about not only single risk, just multi-risk situations. Also, climate change is posing these new multi-risk situations. And we have a recent example here in Catalonia that it seems that with climate change, we can have much more, let's say, intense rainfall events, together with long droughts, which in some way will affect the forest health. And at the end, this is helping to generate problems of debris floods, because there is a lot of biomass that is provided in the rivers because of dead biomass in the forest, etc. So there is a strong link between both risks, but of course also in cascading effects. If we have the loss of forest cover, we may have problems on erosion, more flood risk, even avalanche risk, etc. And so, and it's important, this question, because today we focus the attention on fires and floods. Maybe we don't have too much time to how to deal with this combination of risk, but this is part also of the decision making. And what we find is that in some cases we see a lot of synergies. In this case, it's very easy. If you have a really healthy forest, you will provide also more blue water in terms of water provision, ecosystem service. We have less potential of providing biomass and debris flows, etc., on flash floods, and you are ensuring soil protection, and you also are doing fire prevention. So this question is very important, how to give visibility to all this combination of benefits managing forests, for instance, in this case. I try to be very short. Thank you.
Thanks, Eduard. Now for a question for Bàrbara from Carmen Rodriguez. Who is paying for the goats doing the fire prevention in Montserrat?
The town halls, they're paying for this fire prevention.
Okay, and maybe then another question for you. Do you know how the grazing agreements have been sustained so that the farming and economic activity can continue once the project is over?
Yeah, the grazing agreements were free of charge at the beginning, and they had to be also for the long term. This was the conditions, the preconditions they established at the beginning. And also, I have to say that if there was some pasture crop involved, then the landowner and the farmer made a different agreement, maybe with some payment related. And well, this is all. There was nothing else.
Okay, thank you, Bàrbara. Then another question from Carmen for Marta. Could you explain a little bit more about how participatory risk mapping is done?
Yes, of course. The participatory risk map is organized during a focus group, and usually we have an heterogeneous group of participants at each group, and we work on a map, without any sign of the hazard map or so any signs of the technical knowledge of floods. And we try to ask to people to identify the critical points for floods, such as where there are, for example, near the bridge, or where hotspots are critical in terms of emergency management. So we start with this, and we deal also with critical points related to landslides. And we try to also make stakeholders reflected not only in the punctual risk hotspots, but also try to reflect on how they move between the territory, and so what they cross when they move in the territory. And this is done during the participatory approach with all the citizens and key stakeholders. But on the other side, during the collaboration phase, we go deeper with this risk mapping. So we added a lot of information regarding detailed vulnerability of, in this case, of schools, and also detailed capacity elements of schools, such as the internal emergency plan, or the presence of the capacity of teachers to deal with an emergency, a flood emergency inside the building, and so on. As well as for the vulnerability, we try to gather data And in this case, we did a lot with the school managers regarding the physical vulnerability of building, but also social vulnerability inside the school, so in the school population, taking into account that schools bring with them also a vulnerability of the age. So we have children inside, so they had we had to pay attention more to them. So this is almost the process, and I think that later I can also share some documents regarding our approach in the local risk mapping. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you very much, Marta, and Eduard and Bàrbara for taking time to share with us today about cross risks. And yeah, our time has run out, unfortunately, and there's still many questions to answer. So we'll take these questions and we'll pose it to the panelists, and they will answer the questions, and we will post that on the PyroLife blog or send it out by email. So I would like to thank everyone that joined us today for the webinar, and especially the speakers. It was very nice hearing your different perspectives. So the last thing I will share. Okay, so thank you for everyone that joined. The next PyroLife webinar taking place is on the 26th of May, and it takes us to the north of Europe, to Norway. Victus van Wyk, professor in the Department of Biology at the University of Bergen, will cover the topic, understanding the ecological and evolutionary imprints of humans on biodiversity, climate, on coastal heathlands. Thank you everyone for your time. Have a wonderful rest of the day, and we see you next.